From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the program for you. Brexit shambles. Theresa May leads what looks like a losing battle for her deal and possibly her future. Yellow vest and bed. In a special report, our Andy Borges spends the night with those dedicated to a growing movement. Green casualty. Will the environment pay the biggest price as Emmanuel Macron bows to protesters? Protecting vegans. A landmark case looks at whether vegans should be protected like religious groups. And no, you can't. The battle erupting in Russia over a German philosopher and the name of an airport. All right, it is time to meet our panel this evening. We have, of course, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, which of the stories are you watching closely?
Well, I am fascinated by this debate about veganism, not least of all because there's an awful lot more vegans today than there were even a couple of years ago, according to surveys. But the question is it or should it be equated to a religion? One vegan pointed out today that if you get on a plane to go to Pakistan, you're not allowed to drink wine, you have to wear a headscarf, but you can sit down and have a chicken curry. And she's like, I'm not happy with that. So it's an interesting debate.
Really fascinating indeed. All right, joining us also tonight is Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt, a Swedish-Italian MEP with the European People's Party. Anna Maria, which of the stories are you watching closely?
Brexit.
Yeah.
Very much. The drama continues.
The
story is not over, unfortunately.
Indeed, it is not over. And also with us, the Sun newspaper's Brussels correspondent, Nick Guttridge. Nick, what story?
Well, I mean, Emmanuel Macron is fascinating, and it's really important what's going on there. But today of all days, it's got to be Brexit.
It is.
As we say, it's history in the making. People will be writing books about this stuff in years to come.
No, absolutely, that's right. And that is where we will begin tonight, because fresh from a triple defeat in Parliament, British Prime Minister Theresa May faced a particularly rough grilling this afternoon. In an unprecedented move, the government was held in contempt of Parliament yesterday and forced to publish its legal advice on its Brexit deal minutes before today's session began. Now, that advice, considered an indictment by some for revealing that the so-called backstop arrangement to avoid a hard border could trap the UK in negotiations with the EU for years to come. Let's take a look.
What we have is a government in crisis. A government that has lost 2 Brexit secretaries, a Home Secretary, a Foreign Secretary, a Work and Pension Secretary. A government that has suffered from 3 consecutive defeats in just 2 hours. The first government to do so, Mr. Speaker, in 40 years. And now a government found to be in contempt of Parliament. Is it time that the Prime Minister took responsibility for concealing the facts on her Brexit deal from members in this House and the public? Will she take responsibility?
And joining me live with the latest twists and turns is our London correspondent, Vincent McAviney. Vincent, what was revealed in that legal advice that was published eventually?
Good afternoon, Tessa. Well, as you heard there, the government having to publish that legal advice this morning at 11:30 after becoming the first government ever to be found in contempt of Parliament. And really, there isn't much beyond what we heard from the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox on Monday. It says that there is a risk of a stalemate when it comes to the backstop, and it could lead to protracted rounds of negotiations because the UK could get caught indefinitely if they cannot agree with the EU to end that backstop. So in effect, it is what we already knew. It's just being confirmed. There was a lot of suspicion around that wording. But as we heard from Ian Blackford of the SNP there, who asked questions about this, the government was being incredibly defensive. There were accusations that they had been misleading the Commons. And here's what Theresa May had to say in response.
The advice that he is holding in his left hand has no difference from the statement that was given. Indeed, I might take up the personal challenge from the Right Honourable Gentleman. I have myself said on the floor of this House that there is indeed no unilateral right to pull out of the backstop. What I have also said is it is not the intention of either party that the backstop should A, be used in the first place, or should B, if it is used, should be anything other than temporary.
Now, the DUP, the Northern Irish Party, who are in a supply and confidence deal with Theresa May to give her majority, well, they voted against the government yesterday. And after that publication, Nigel Dodds, an MP here who leads them in Westminster, said it is devastating what is in this legal document. Now, we already thought that there were real cracks in the relationship between the two parties, but it seems clear now, after events in the past 24 hours, that Theresa May cannot count on the support of the DUP next Tuesday in that meaningful vote in Parliament. She's trying to bring little groups of MPs, 5 at a time, we understand, into Downing Street to try to convince them. But as these debates carry on, the second one just starting now on security issues, there's another 3 days of debates to go. It seems that Theresa May is not gaining any MPs to try to help her next week. And of course, MPs now have this new power that they voted for last night, which means that if the vote fails, when a vote is brought back, they won't just get to vote down Theresa May's deal, they'll also get to determine the course, where Britain goes. And a lot of people here think that that now means that the prospect of no deal is off the table. But everyone wondering just how much longer Theresa May can hang on for. She didn't get as big a grilling as at PMQs as we thought. Jeremy Corbyn unexpectedly decided to talk about a domestic policy issue, a universal credit, but she is looking still like she's going to lose that vote next Tuesday.
All right, thank you for that, correspondent Vincent McAviney talking to us from London there. All right, so is this, I mean, Nick, you were talking about history in the making. I'd like to put it to Maria. Is this a turning point, do you think?
It could be. I think it's important that now everyone takes responsibility in a cool, calm and collected way, look at the long-term interests. And that does not require more political drama. I think we need less political drama. And I truly hope that the Commons comes together on the 11th and backs the deal. I don't see a room in the European Union which is absolutely united, the 3 institutions behind this deal. Not that we like it, but we see that the possible in the circumstances, the best possible in the circumstances, with the red lines from London and the integrity of the internal market and the autonomy of EU decision-making to preserve. So I truly hope that that withdrawal agreement will be backed.
But for Theresa
on the 11th.
May, yeah, but for Theresa May, she has been a survivor. Has this taken a terrible turn for her, finally?
Yeah, I mean, is this one too far? I mean, there are people talking here saying, they don't know whether she's going to be at next week's summit, what's going to happen. It's obviously very, very bad. The only silver lining, as was mentioned, is the fact that it does potentially take no deal off the table. The EU have been saying all along, kind of really helping Theresa out with her own line by saying it's her deal or nothing at all. It now looks instead like it's going to be her deal or no Brexit, or possibly kind of a Norway-style, Norway plus customs union, but Brexiteers hate that as well. So all those Brexit-supporting MPs, do they actually go, Theresa May's deal is now the hardest Brexit we can realistically get? So we don't like it, but we're going to have to throw ourselves behind it.
It seems that the word indefinitely in that legal advice did unite a lot of her opponents against her.
Yeah, I think there was a feeling actually after last night, despite how difficult yesterday had been in Parliament, the first time the British government had been defeated 3 times in one day, I think since 1978, there was still a feeling that actually had not been a bad day for Theresa May, because it was a reminder to Brexiteers that the likelihood of no Brexit happening, that the UK would essentially stay in the EU, seemed to be strengthening, and that may well play into her hands. That they might bite their tongue and go with her deal because it would be better than remaining inside. But I think what today has done, what this legal advice has done, is lay down in black and white what everyone dislikes about the Brexit deal, who dislikes.
But it's not like they didn't know.
It's not they didn't know, but it is there now in black and white, like legal terms that, despite the optimism of the language that no one wants the backstop to be indefinite, that it could well be, despite the language that, it will not lead to a hard border down the Irish Sea, it could well do, and that Britain may find itself in intractable negotiations for years to come when it comes to future trade. So for Brexiteers, it's a reminder of everything they hated. And I would just take up this point about no deal somehow being off the table. I don't buy that, because it is in legislation in Westminster that Britain is going to leave on the 29th of March. Parliament will have to vote to overturn that. And the problem is that while they may not like Theresa May's deal, can they unite behind anything else? And if they can't, Britain crashes out. Yeah,
we'll talk about the scenarios in a bit, but I want to ask, if this doesn't go through because of the numbers, it looks like it's not going to get through. Then she comes back to the EU. Then she comes back to face the rest of the 27. Then what? What happens then?
I agree with you that what happened yesterday was fairly historical, of course, in this additional drama adds to the uncertainties in all directions. And it shows once again how Brexit is just a lose-lose for all. There is no win for anyone. And I don't see that there is anything else than a hard Brexit, whatever happens. So if Theresa May would fall out of this, I don't see, and it's not for me to say, of course, I don't see how that would solve the problem. You still need a majority in Commons for or against the deal.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And as Darren was mentioning, the no deal is probably not off the table. Here, there are 7 scenarios. Which scenario do you think, Nick, could be the most likely?
Oh, God, that's a question and a half. We're going softer, is what it looks like. That looks like the direction of travel now towards a kind of a Norway style, because it's off the shelf. It's something that you can come back to the EU, and they've said they will accept. They'll put lots of conditions on it. Britain won't like some of those conditions, I suspect. It's a much bigger country than Norway. But it's something you can do in a hurry. You know, this thing is, if it's not going to be Theresa May's deal, it needs bodging together pretty quickly.
Is there enough support for that kind of
Well, I think that's the big question. So you talked about what's going to happen next week. I mean, the EU, talking about to officials here, you know, not very much, even if Theresa May's
There's not much that can be done.
They say they are not moving on the fundamentals of this deal. I think one of them quipped that they might change some superficial things. They could print it out in red, white and blue paper to make it slightly more appealing to Theresa May. But fundamentally, the detail's not going to change. Parliament is probably more likely to vote for a Norway Plus or an EEA-style deal. The problem is, though, we've got so much politics between now and even potentially getting that point where Parliament can vote on it.
So many questions in it. All right, well, as the UK torments itself over Brexit, as you've seen, one prominent Leave supporter is arranging his very own exit. Let's take a look.
I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you?
This, the famous moment UKIP leader Nigel Farage became a household name by teasing the former Commission President Herman Van Rompuy. That was back in 2010, when the word Brexit hadn't crossed anyone's lips. But all that was about to change. Mr. Farage used UKIP's growing popularity to pressure David Cameron into calling a referendum on EU membership. Fast forward a few years, and as the UK prepares to leave the EU, Nigel Farage is leaving the party he nurtured for 25 years. Why? Well, it's about UKIP's new leadership. Mr. Farage accusing Jared Batten of obsessing about Islam and slamming the decision to bring in far-right activist Tommy Robinson. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Mr. Farage said, "The very idea of Tommy Robinson being at the centre of the Brexit debate is too awful to contemplate. And so, with a heavy heart, and after all my years of devotion to the party, I am leaving UKIP today. There is a huge space for a Brexit party in British politics, but it won't be filled by UKIP." The question now on everyone's lips, could Mr. Farage soon be toasting to a new Brexiteer party? Okay, Nick, another guess. What is he up to?
Well, I think he felt that he had no choice but to leave. I mean, you know, UKIP has very, very radically changed direction, to put it mildly, under Gerard Batten, and, you know, it's been kind of losing MEPs like there's no tomorrow. He had said he would go if a motion wasn't passed in the kind of the UKIP body the other day, and it didn't pass. You know, Tommy Robinson's still part. So,
do you think there's a new political party brewing that we're not?
Well, are you going to miss him?
Not. I mean, if there's any exit that I would welcome is from him.
Right.
It's been a destructive force and force is a compliment, and an example of how populism can really damage the people of Great Britain and the people of Europe. Out as soon as possible.
I mean, he's very heavily in with leave means leave, and that seems to be morphing now into some kind of new UKIP-style movement. So
there you go. He is staging his very own exit there. All right, coming up on Raw Politics for you, philosopher Immanuel Kant touted the moral imperative, but in Russia, officials are making it imperative to stop one airport from being renamed after the German thinker. Plus, not backing down. Our Annelise Borges takes us inside the Yellow Vest demonstrations in Lille in a special report. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Emmanuel Macron may have blinked first, but French protesters say they won't back down. They're resisting the government's concession yesterday to suspend proposed fuel tax hikes and instead say the Yellow Vest protest will continue. In fact, new factions are emerging almost daily. High school students set fires outside schools yesterday, protesting government reforms to the university application process. Now, the Yellow Vest demonstrations have been growing for over 3 weeks, turning violent at times. 3 people have died and historic monuments have been vandalized. All of this highlighting the vulnerability of Emmanuel Macron's presidency amid calls for him to step down. All right, the city of Lille has also seen Yellow Vest protests, and that's where we find our Euronews correspondent Annelise Borges tonight. Annelise, good to see you there. You have been spending a lot of time the past few days with the Yellow Vest protesters. So are they emboldened by this government U-turn that we saw yesterday?
In one word, Tessa, yes, absolutely. They have been talking about the fact that this changes nothing, that the government did not make a significant concession. But the fact of the matter is this is a government that had insisted it would not change course, and it has made a significant U-turn. These protesters here in the northern part of France have been telling me they don't even want to talk to Emmanuel Macron anymore. They don't want to listen from Emmanuel Macron anymore. They don't trust the French president, and they don't believe the French president is going to do anything to change their lives. These are the French people who are struggling. They say France has become too expensive. They can no longer afford vacations. They can no longer afford a new car. They can no longer afford food and electricity bills in some cases. Several of them have been telling me that they can't make ends meet and that they are very concerned about the future. They have been asking Emmanuel Macron for more justice in France, and they say the message wasn't heard. We decided to come here and to spend time with the Yellow Vests to try to understand who they are and what they want.
For 3 weeks now, France has been on fire. Anger is fueling the biggest opposition movement the administration of Emmanuel Macron has faced so far. And the government's change in strategy didn't convince protesters, who say they will continue feeding the flames that brought them here.
On va pas arrêter parce que ce que Édouard Philippe a dit tout à l'heure, de geler, je suis pas d'accord. Parce que dans 6 mois, ça va être belote. On est là demain, après-demain, à Noël, à Nouvel An, au mois de janvier, février, mars, avril. Voilà.
The so-called Yellow Vests have been shaking France to its core. These men and women say they are the true face of this country. The face of social injustice, of anger, but also fear and humiliation.
Savoir si je vais réussir à garder un logement ou si, comme pas mal de monde, je me retrouve à la rue. C'est le problème pour beaucoup de personnes.
Et ça fait peur ?
Ça fait peur, ouais.
Je suis au chômage, j'ai dû repartir chez mes parents. À 33 ans, c'est un peu compliqué. Moi, j'ai 2 enfants. Je suis divorcé. Il y a la pension alimentaire. J'ai revendu la maison. Et je cherchais un logement, mais comme j'ai perdu mon emploi, aux ACDIC, même pas 1 200 € par mois, c'est dur de trouver un logement.
This group of protesters has been gathering in the outskirts of Lille in northern France for 3 weeks now. We asked to join them for a night to understand who exactly they are and if they can stick together.
Vous vous sentez quand même assez unis dans le mouvement, parce que c'est des personnalités différentes.
Vous savez, comme elle a dit la personne, même ceux qui y participent. Notre force, c'est justement la diversité. On a des retraités, maintenant on a des étudiants qui commencent aussi à suivre le mouvement. On a des gens qui travaillent, qui se lèvent tôt, on a des chômeurs, on a des personnes handicapées. Donc voilà, il a le peuple là, contre lui.
He is Emmanuel Macron, The French president is the target of the Yellow Vests' disappointment, but also of their sense of humor.
Vous avez l'Élysée ou pas?
Bonsoir madame, est-ce qu'on pourrait demander à Macron qui démissionne s'il vous plaît?
Je n'ai pas d'actualité, merci, bonne soirée, au revoir.
Au revoir. C'était l'Élysée. Je voulais vous faire profiter avec l'Élysée.
Son mépris total quoi. Depuis qu'il est élu, il a fait que de la provocation. Maintenant, vous voyez, il a commencé à mettre un genou à terre et il va être à terre.
The Yellow Vests want the government to lower taxes, raise the minimum salary, and improve their living conditions. They also have some more ambitious demands that include the resignation of Emmanuel Macron. Some within the movement, however, see things differently and don't rule out the possibility of joining the political scene.
Les Gilets jaunes, ils représentent le peuple et il y aura un parti, j'en suis persuadé. On est obligé d'écouter le peuple. Maintenant, il y en a marre que ce soit des énarques, des technocrates qui ne peuvent pas savoir en fait ce qu'on ressent, le peuple, qui se lève justement tôt, qui travaille difficilement, ou bien qui sont en situation de handicap et qu'on les aide pas, qu'on les laisse pour compte, il y en a assez. Maintenant, ce qu'il nous faut, c'est des représentants qui sont partis de notre parti, de notre en fait situation.
It's unclear what's next for the Yellow Vests and where the movement can take France. What is certain is that those who have felt ignored by power have now succeeded in making themselves visible again. Annelise Borges in northern France for Euronews.
So there you have at least a small part of this story of the men and women across France who say it is time for the government to see and listen to them.
All right, thank you for that, Annelise Borges, talking to us from Lille, and she's with the Yellow Vest protesters there. And joining me in the studio to discuss this further is French MEP from Les Républicains, Angélique Delahaye, Brian McGuire, an Irish journalist and reporter with Euractiv, and still with me, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Angélique, I'll start with you because Annelise was saying there it is unclear where this movement is going to take France. What do you think?
Well, it's a pity for me to see our citizens, French citizens, in this way of life. Our president is huge. He has to understand, he has to ask, to answer what the French people need. I think this increase of taxes is just the only small things, just because our citizens are over all those taxes and they want to live with what they win from their work. And in France, some people, more people than each month, you have more people who thought that it's more difficult to live when you work and you have a small
salary.
Yeah.
So this is,
it's more difficult than to be helped. So it's like they thought that it's not justice, and they want more justice.
So the fuel tax, in fact, it's just a trigger.
The answer of the president to wait for 6 months to decide about taxes is not the answer. We have to break down those taxes, just because they don't know what the money is doing with the money of these taxes.
As Angélique was saying, this is just a suspension. 6 months down the line, it's like kicking the can down the road. We'll have the same conversation again, but what can the government realistically do at this point?
There's a big dichotomy in terms of who's talking about what here. Macron and what they would say is the global elite are talking about the end of the world. These people are talking about the end of the month. They want to see food on the table. This man we saw in Annelise's report, 1,200 a month he gets on income support. The mean income in France for working people is 1,700. So 50% of people in France earn less than 1,700 a month. Yet Macron, at the beginning of his presidency, gives a tax cut to the wealthy. 1% of people in France own 20% of wealth.
Is this something that was brewing, Darren? Not just now, but the austerity, the years of austerity.
Let me be blunt about this. Do the Yellow Vest protesters have no one to blame but themselves? These scenes we see in France are a lot worse than we have seen in recent years, but they are familiar. People taking to the streets when a government tries to initiate reform. One of the reasons that the French economy has not grown as strongly as other Western European economies, even and in despite of 2008, countries like Holland and Germany, is because it has not been able to reform. So I don't know how a French President, Emmanuel Macron, can be blamed for all the ills of French society when he has been president for a relatively short period of time. And it's probably,
the critical mass that
These
we're
have been around for a long time.
Exactly.
And whether it's Nicolas Sarkozy, whether it's François Hollande, they've been trying to reform France for years. Certain sections of French society are not letting it happen. And then they take to the streets again to complain about stopping reform that may well have helped.
No, certainly. I think this has been simmering for some time now. And we've heard a lot about the Yellow Vest movement in France. And now it appears that protesters actually in other countries are joining this movement to express their anger as well. Alex Morgan in theCUBE has more on this part of the story. Alex?
Tessa, do you remember these scenes? Police cars overturned, yellow jacket protesters clashing with authorities. Well, these scenes weren't in Paris. In fact, they weren't even in France. This was Belgium. Last week, yellow jacket protesters clashing in the EU quarter of Brussels with police in the riot gear we, of course, seen in France. These protesters protesting against what they say are rising living costs, higher taxes, but those yellow jackets mimicking, copying the gilets jaunes in France. Of course, this becoming now seemingly a political statement across the EU for discontent. Let's bring up this, though. Outside of the EU, check this video out. It shows a Serbian opposition MP putting on a gilet jaune, if you like, a yellow jacket here in the Serbian parliament. Of course, this outside the EU. Here, the symbol again being used, though, to protest against rising fuel costs. But now let me show you this, moving well beyond the streets of Europe. Let me show you these images of people in yellow jackets, starting with the top one, actually. If we go up here, you can see riot-clad police here and a protester in a yellow jacket. That could be like any of the cities we've seen, but this is Basra. This is in Iraq. These scenes showing clashes on Tuesday between security forces and protesters. So what is going on here? Why are the yellow jackets now in Iraq? Let me bring up some of the key points these demonstrators are making. Well, this latest round of demonstrations is all about basic services. Protesters in Baghdad wanting the authorities to deal with a lack of public services like clean drinking water, electricity. The latest unrest began in June, but I think the key thing here, NBC News speaking to people on the ground about these yellow jackets. Well, one of the organisers saying it's a return to yellow jackets. Actually, the Iraqis wore these in 2015 during similar demonstrations. It is fair to say, though, they've been inspired to go back to them after what's happened in France, sort of a more unified symbol, if you like, of the discontent. But let's just round this up for you here. Brussels, Basra, Paris. We are now seeing the gilet jaune, the yellow jacket, being used by people around the world, almost a global show of discontent. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the CUBE team. So it seems that the yellow vest has become a symbol really of a larger inequality that we're seeing, not just in France.
Not just in France, but in France we have our own history. We do the revolution, and I think I understand reform. It's quite difficult to do in France, but the reform done by Mr. Macron is not social justice, and French people need social justice.
And very quickly, is this something that's waiting to explode on a broader level, the inequality we see around the world?
Yes. First of all, inequality is bad for everybody. It's bad for the rich and the poor because economies don't grow. Unless we address the widening inequality and within Europe, within France and globally, we will see stronger and more aggressive counter-revolutions like this.
All right.
Clearly, there might be one winner, though, which is the people who manufacture yellow jackets.
Well, there you go. There you go. And it seems that it is spreading. All right, after the break here on Raw Politics, a day after Emmanuel Macron's U-turn on an eco tax, we head to Poland in a key climate conference to talk about the fallout. Don't go away. Welcome back. Now, before the break, we were talking about France, a country reputed as one of the world's most environmentally conscious countries. Now, that just bowed to public pressure and reversed one of its key climate reforms. The decision comes as world leaders gather in Poland for a critical climate summit. Now, for more on the mood at COP24, I'm joined by Harjit Singh from ActionAid, and he specializes in climate policy. Thank you for joining us, Harjit. What is the mood there at COP24, especially after this U-turn that we see of Macron with regard to the fuel tax hike?
The mood is somber here in Katowice, where we are finalizing the rule book of the Paris Agreement, and not because of what's happening in France, but because of the lack of ambition that we are seeing to deal with this existential crisis called climate change. We are seeing lack of ambition in terms of raising money to deal with the impacts, and at the same time, how are we going to support developing countries in raising their ambition on cutting down ambition? So we're still seeing lack of ambition here.
Yeah, that lack of ambition. I just want to bring up the tweet from President Trump, the President of the United States. He said that the concessions made by the French President Emmanuel Macron, he said, "I am glad that my friend Emmanuel Macron and the protesters in Paris have agreed with the conclusion I reached 2 years ago. The Paris Agreement is fatally flawed because it raises the price of energy for responsible countries while whitewashing some of the worst polluters in the world." He also said, "I want clean air and clean water and have been making great strides in improving America's environment. But American taxpayers and American workers should not pay to clean up other countries' pollution." Now, what does that kind of attitude coming from world leaders, how much of an impact is it? We're seeing a lot of pullback, a lot of watering down of ambition.
Yes, Mr. Trump should know that if the US and other countries continue to burn coal and other fossil fuel, providing clean air and clean water will be impossible. It's one planet and one climate system, and we are dealing with a global crisis. So we all have to come together to bring down emissions and raise money to deal with the crisis. Domestic political challenges are everywhere. We are seeing what's happening in France right now. But let's also understand there are countries who are facing existential crisis. You have Tuvalu going underwater. You have Bangladesh that's going to see 20% of its land completely submerged. You have Maldives facing such an existential crisis. So there are far more bigger challenges that we are facing. If we continue to increase emissions like this, we will see 150 million premature deaths globally. We are going to see thousands of coastal cities constantly flooded. That's the kind of situation we are in. So we need to see a lot more seriousness here and ambition to deal with this global crisis called climate change.
All right, thank you for that. Harjit Singh from ActionAid talking to us there from COP24 in Poland. And joining me in the studio still, we have French MEP Angelique Delahaye, our political editor Darren McCaffrey, and Brian McQuarrie from Euractiv. All right, he was talking there about this existential crisis, but we see a clash really of domestic politics, domestic need, as you said, end of the month versus end of the world. What is wrong here? Are we not talking enough about social dialogue and justice, as Angelique was saying, in light of climate change?
When the European Union was set up as the coal and steel community, they understood this. They saw that the job losses were going to occur then, and they already began to put in practice some social funds to make that adjustment easier. A lot of that's missing today. Europe's doing a lot to help with the adjustment, but it's not enough. And we see we have a lot of other challenges, the Industry 4.0, and all these factors are colliding at the same time. And we've never had such a challenge to our democratic system and the liberal democracies that we have today as previous generations. So all these things are colliding together, and it's extremely difficult for governments to implement pressures which seem necessary, like Macron's tax on fuel, but they're not doing it in the right way. And the difference is, for COP21, it was a more grassroots, bottom-up approach. This is top-down, and people are rejecting it.
And what about from the Yellow Vest perspective in terms of fuel tax? They've been saying, we actually care about the environment as well. What is the perspective? All right.
Of course, the goals of Paris agreements are not also good. They are essential. In order to forward the ecological transition. But President Macron makes mistakes, justifying new tax with the Paris Agreement. This is just the best way to collapse it. Ecological transition may be fairer and may be economical viable. So taxes never provide solutions.
Darren, do you think the environment is a casualty of all of this in the end, at the end of the day?
I think it is, and actually there's a report out today that says that 2017 was the highest weather-related damage period ever on record. Costs 331 billion euros worth of damage annually. 11,500 people died last year because of climate change related events. It is entirely possible that figure will be higher this year. And the point about Donald Trump is, and what Harjeet was picking up on, is that, it is one world, and he's actually wrong, because the advanced economies this year, we're likely to see an increase in carbon emissions for the first time in 5 years.
Exactly.
And India, one of those countries I'm sure he was alluding to, is actually well on target to hit 2 of its 3 main promises on the Paris Climate Accord, way ahead of schedule, way ahead of 2030. So simply to say that this is not a problem for the developed world is completely wrong. The problem is clearly the messaging. And it is this thing where voters, we all know that there are more extreme weather events, whether you live in Sweden or Lisbon or California this year, you cannot get away from that.
But there's a hypocrisy there, I think.
But people, the people's willingness to give up what they've got to make sacrifices just isn't there at the moment.
Yeah, Darren's right.
5 seconds, yeah.
Darren's right, it's the messaging. The French people are 94% in agreement that climate change is man-made. They want to see change to this. They're prepared to make some sacrifices, but don't demand it from the poorest people. Don't give tax cuts to the rich and then take 200 euros out of the pockets of the poor people, the middle class.
I think that is the crux of the matter, especially for the Yellow Vest protesters. All right, let's turn our attention to Russia now, where residents of the city of Kaliningrad are up in arms about the naming of their airport. Have a look. Here, in his Russian hometown, you'll find the tomb of the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. 200 years after his death, he sparked an unexpected controversy in Kaliningrad over the prospect of naming the city's airport after him, with a top naval officer calling him a traitor and one lawmaker branding him a Russophobe. This respected philosopher fell out of favor. The public deciding in the end, no, you can't. Would you mind flying to an airport called Kant?
You can't land. No, but I think, this is, again, some of the worst forms of nationalism. Kaliningrad, when Kant was around, was part of German lands. And I think that admiral who said that he demeaned himself because he went to university and he wrote strange books that none of us present have ever read today. And that's his argument about why it should not be called Kant Airport. It's another sign of the badness sometimes of nationalism. But yeah, maybe naming an airport Kant is
I know it's probably not the most
sensible.
attractive. Yeah, it's probably not the best name ever. All right, after the break on Raw Politics, should vegans have the same legal protections as religion? We interview the man behind a landmark case in the UK that will decide just that. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, veganism has grown exponentially in recent years. There are vegan restaurants, vegan cookbooks, and if one man in the UK has his way, vegans may soon have special protections. Animal rights activist Jordi Casamitiana was sacked by the League Against Cruel Sports after he revealed it invested in companies involved in animal testing. Well, the League says he was fired for gross misconduct. He says it was because of his ethical vegan beliefs. Now, his case is now before a tribunal, which is considering whether ethical veganism should have the same protections as religious or philosophical beliefs. Well, joining us from London now is the man behind the tribunal case, Jordi Casamitiana. Thanks for joining us, Jordi. Okay, why should vegans be afforded the same protections as veganism, that is, as religion?
Well, because ethical vegans, we do follow our lifestyle because we have a strong philosophical beliefs. And in UK law, anybody that is discriminated against their religion or against the philosophical belief should be protected. The only issue is veganism a philosophical belief? I think my case will be able to prove that it is, because every single aspect of my life is affected by my vegan lifestyle and philosophy. Anything I eat, anything I buy, anything I do, therefore it affects me as much as the religious effects. So that should not be discriminated, me or anybody else that follows that belief.
Yeah, but then where do you draw the line then? I mean, anyone who says that I have chosen a lifestyle and this is how I am and I'm discriminated because of it, therefore it should be a religion. Where do you draw the line?
This is a very good question. The line is drawn by the courts. That's why every time there is a belief that could be one of those, it will have to go to court. Then the court will apply some criteria. It's about 6 or 7 points that the appeals court has already defined. And if it fills that points, then it's a protected belief. If it doesn't, then not.
And Jordi, very quickly, what kind of discrimination are you talking about?
Could be anything. In my case, I was dismissed, and I believe I was dismissed because I was an ethical vegan. But it could be that you are not receiving enough of the right food in a meal provided by your employer. Could be you are not allowed to speak to your colleagues about veganism in your break. Could be not being able to wear a vegan T-shirt. All these things could be causes of discrimination.
All right, thank you very much for joining us there. Jordi Castamitiana joining us from London there. And in the studio, I'm joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, Alexandra Clark, a sustainable food consultant with Humane Society International. And still with me is Brian McGuire as well, a reporter with Euractiv. All right, Alexandra, I'll start with you, I guess. With this, why should veganism, from your point of view, we heard Jordi's point of view, should it be a religion? Should it be considered a religion?
I think it's important to reflect on why people are choosing to adopt vegan diets, and the reasons they're choosing to adopt vegan diets are often very important, very personal to them, and these are not small issues. These are issues of animal suffering, and it's very difficult to fathom the scale, the amount of suffering endured by farm animals. If we just look at the EU, the European Union, then 9 billion farm animals are raised for food every year. Globally, it's 90 billion. So it's difficult to even comprehend that level of suffering, and people feel incredibly strongly about this. If we talk about the environment, then numerous environmental crises linked to industrial animal agriculture. And again, people feel incredibly passionately about this.
Yeah, but this is you know, as I also asked Jordi, is where do you draw the line, and what other people of other religions are facing persecution for their religion? How do you compare the two? I mean, put them in the same basket.
Obviously, there is a distinction between levels of persecution, but there has been, certainly in recent years, the level of vitriol against aimed at vegans seems quite unjustified when they are making a choice that they believe benefits the planet and benefits animals, and shouldn't necessarily doesn't necessarily deserve this level of contempt often.
I think we were talking about this before the show, Darren. I was bringing up the point that is this you know, this will, if the tribunal does decide that it is a religion, it will be in the same basket as race, sexuality, gender, and these, I just get the feeling that being vegan is more of a choice, a lifestyle choice, rather than any of those other characteristics.
Yeah, it is quite difficult. First of all, we have to recognise that the number of people who say they're vegans has increased massively. I think in the UK alone, it's gone from 150,000 5 years ago to 600,000 today. That's almost, you know, if it carries on at that rate, it'll overtake the number of people who go to church every week in the UK quite quickly. All these sincerely held beliefs, they are, I think, for everyone who is a vegan. Does it have an impact on how they act culturally and what they think is acceptable within their society? It does. So does that start to go into the realms of what religion does in many regards? Yes, it does. And so just as there are protections for people of faith, and there are, maybe there should be protections for people who sincerely hold these beliefs. The problem is that they are fundamentally at odds with what an awful lot of people who also they live alongside with, and what are the practical, because you can go from very easy from discrimination to saying, actually, I want meat to be banned.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, you have a burger, and I'm offended that you would have a burger. Burger essentially is blasphemy in this case if it's meat. This is it's the practical application. I think we could probably agree on the philosophical elements of this. That if you take a rational approach, yes, we should respect one and respect the other. But the practical implementation, this is what in the UK law at least, how you define a religious system or a belief system as well, which is recognised by law. And when you begin to impact on others to a large degree, then the law will not protect you. So I think his case would probably fail in this instance because he will demand a certain level of implementation of laws which will impact too many people to make this a practical application of a religion or belief system.
As Rudy was saying, what will happen is that the court will have a right to say, to decide whether one has faced discrimination or not. But then wouldn't it become, where do you draw the line? Wouldn't it become my rights against your rights, and let's just go to court and resolve the problems? It becomes a clash of rights almost.
I'm not sure if it's a clash of rights. I think to have a distinction that there does seem, veganism for some reason inspires quite a high level of anger.
I've never heard anybody angry with a vegan, not ever.
Certainly, if you look at social media, there's a lot of anger aimed at vegans, which.
But we don't have a human right not to be offended. So whatever you say on social media, switch it off.
Have you faced discrimination?
Personally, no, I haven't.
You haven't?
No, but
I may have faced mocking, but not discrimination.
Could you say it's discrimination, though, what some people seem to be arguing, the very fact that people will eat meat next to them, the fact that they're bombarded by advertisements, particularly this time of the year,
and they find it
for
offensive.
Turkeys and for meat, they find that, in a sense, offensive.
No, but we live in a free society, so certainly we should accept, just as vegans should be free to express their beliefs, also vegans should allow others to.
Jordi doesn't give that impression. He gives the impression that you should accept everything that he believes, and that his sense of what would constitute an offence seems very broad.
I think ultimately this is an interesting discussion, not least of all because it comes back to the numbers of people involved in this, and that veganism is clearly on the rise and becoming popular, just as religion, for example, in many Western countries has become increasingly unpopular or not. And so how we deal with shifting and changing cultural attitudes to things is important. It is right that they should be challenged, both sides. This court case, indeed, may well be right to try and work out whether this man does have a case. But it is important as a society that we do not just have ourselves rooted in something because it has historically always been there. If people's attitudes are changing, then and the law and our societal norms need to keep up with that.
All right, I'll give you the last word on this, on veganism. Where do you think this is headed now that the discussion has been brought up?
I think it's just important that we're having the discussion because it always used to be very much on the fringes of society and it was seen as more of a sort of lefty movement and it's very much moved into the mainstream. So I think it's a very important discussion. We talk about veganism, but also why people are choosing this, and particularly often it may be health reasons, but the animal welfare and the environmental impact of animal agriculture is a really important discussion.
Right, you pointed out it does evoke a lot of emotions.
I just don't think like kind of vegans, which is we've seen running into restaurants, shouting at people and disrupting, which has happened, is the right way forward either.
It's another story. All right. Now for today's Raw Moment, it comes from Germany, where Angela Merkel has come up with a new description for digitalization, after branding it new territory a few years ago. That's today's Raw Moment.
Ich habe früher dazu mal Neuland gesagt. Das hat mir einen großen Shitstorm eingebracht. Deshalb will ich das jetzt nicht einfach wiederholen. Also jedenfalls ist es aber in gewisser Weise noch nicht durchschrittenes Terrain. Und
Angela Merkel saying that word.
Angela Merkel's human, apparently. She's a lot more free at the moment to express herself, and clearly she seems to be enjoying the moment as well.
Oh, are we allowed to use this word?
I'm not sure.
I think it's German.
No. The answer is no.
The answer is no. I'm not going to use it. However, it is and was a few years ago put into the German dictionary.
Yeah, that was
widely used in Germany. It's not just Angela Merkel, but I think it's great that she can use it and we can't.
It translates as Brexit in German as well, I think.
All right, thank you very much for joining us tonight on Raw Politics. And we do want to know what you're talking about, so do tell us. I'm on Twitter @TessaRcilia, or you can follow us at Euronews and do use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening. Bye for now and see you again. Same time, same place.